Because I declare by the time I turn 30 years old, I will have at least $1 million.
You hungry? Let's make a snack.
Ayy, poppin' like I'm supposed to. Watch out for the people that ain't close to. Speak a little something you could toast to. I ain't tryna hear about what you won't do. Moving like I'm into. Hit the ground running like the rent do. Speak a little something that you're into. I ain't tryna hear about what you been through. Like hold up.
Is so much scamming being mentioned around you. You know, what's interesting? The people who I scammed out of money, out of whatever I scammed them out of, where they at? Where they post at? Where they stuff at? Why we ain't heard from them? Think about it. Then start shouting. Huh?
What's up, good people, and welcome back, where it is time for us to serve up another episode of our Surviving Darius Crooks Series, where I take you on an intimate journey of the life behind the mask of a harmless, jolly food blogger, from his early life through his most recent scams and crimes. So let's get into it. Chapter 2. Now, you would think doing a retrospective series of someone's history would be fairly easy to do by just looking back at the past, especially when half of their life has been documented online by themselves as well as others. But what I'm finding is that this is way harder to do than you would think, because the person that we are following and discussing and doing a retrospect of has reinvented themselves so many times that we can barely put all the pieces together. That in of itself has become a full-time job alone. Putting together this timeline and shifting through what's true and what's fiction from the man himself. And I say that because even since the release of part 1 and 2 of the Surviving Darius Crooks series, there has been new information that has come out and things that have been discovered and unearthed that have added some pieces to even what I told you before, which I definitely would have shared in those videos had I had the information prior to recording them. And long story short, those type of situations have become a huge challenge for my perfection paralysis, because I intended to create this series in consecutive order of the businesses, the crimes, his life, etc., while making this as concise as possible to make this all digestible for the general audience. However, with new unknown facts coming out almost every few days, I am now realizing that that won't be as easy or possible to do in all cases as I would prefer in this situation. So basically, moving forward, I'm just going to present the facts as they are known to me at the time of the recording of the videos. And as we move on, if major things are surfaced or unsurfaced, then I will add that in and add that into other videos or create another separate video for updates. Do we have a deal? Great. All right, so let's get into this episode. So in episode 1 and 2, we gave an overview of Darius's story of origins as it is known to us based on my personal experience and those things that we have gathered from his very own words via social media. And in those first 2 episodes, we also started to discuss his first ill-fated venture into entrepreneurship, which would normally be an admirable undertaking for someone under the age of 21. However, that's only when it's moral and not considered criminal. So as we covered in part 2, Darius started his deluxe payroll company out of his bedroom in his West Side apartment in the city of Chicago. In approximately 2001 or 2003, while he was still working for a national payroll services company, he then attempted to steal some of their clients who were on his roster as a client services rep, which eventually led him to being discovered by his employer and then immediately terminated. And this is another situation where I don't have to say allegedly, because I was in his bedroom while he was creating the website to this payroll company. And if you aren't up to date on my relation to Darius and how I know so much about his skeletons, crimes, scams, and victims he left behind in his Chicago days, I suggest that you stop this video right now and go to part 1 of this series so that you don't get lost on this retrospective journey with us. Because I guarantee you that there are a ton of twists and turns in front of us. Because the Harry Potter series ain't got nothing on the witchcraft, tricks, and wizardry you'll soon see that Darius Crooks performed over his life. Anyway, from what we do know, the deluxe payroll company was not a crime. crime. Just basically in an immoral sense of Darius attempting to steal his employer's intellectual property and then attempting to steal the clients as well, which began a pattern of what can still be seen today. And in summary, because I did cover this in part 1 and 2 of the series, this so far will go on record as Darius's first attempt at a major scam based on what we know thus far. And so by 2011, after Darius had gone through many ups and downs of being terminated from many corporate employers, he had at this point began his venture into being a YouTuber with his everyday cooking YouTube channel. And by this time, he was also trying to execute his plan of becoming a millionaire by the age of 30. Now, back then, the everyday cooking YouTube channel was legit and pretty much still is today, kinda, unless you consider buying bots to become your subscribers to make your subscriber count higher to be a scam. And that's one of the methods that he has used to get people to buy into the smoke and mirrors act of him having well over 3 million followers across all platforms. However, for those of us who are professionals in the social media influencer world, we could immediately tell that something wasn't right with his follower or subscriber counts on these platforms versus his engagement, because there's math that goes into that. And generally, there's certain percentages that we all are aware of. And for the number of followers that he has and subscribers on YouTube, his engagement is nowhere near the levels that it should be to have that many followers. And the fact that when you look at it, his engagement on YouTube specifically is very near to mine, and he has 20 times supposedly the number of subscribers, that's a big red flag. But I'll leave that judgment call to y'all. Nevertheless, some people have actually looked at his analysis for his social media platforms, which is normal for those of us in this industry where we do comparisons of those people who are in our genre or competitors, etc. Competitors, I use that loosely because we're all in this together. But we can actually look at the stats of other influencers, their channels, their platforms, etc. And we can do comparisons to, for one, make sure, you know, you're on the right path, looking at trends, etc. And so we all have the ability to do that, and there are programs that allow us to do that. And so that's not abnormal at all. So after someone actually pulled his data for social media and was able to see his actual account without the inflated bots, these were the actual numbers. And honestly, these numbers are not bad, but obviously still too low for his ego. So he allegedly purchased followers and bots, which I found interesting because this is probably another reason why he claimed that bots take over his IG lives when he takes it off private. But the truth is, it's also on private so that the public can't see his IG lives. I said IG lies. That's what I meant to say. That's what I was thinking. But the public can't see his IG lives to see the lies that he tells in them and point it out to his beehive. Because the truth is, if the public was able to get into those IG lives, they would definitely take over with the truth and bombard the D-wives. But back to the real scams. One of Darius's first provable scams and crimes is one that I remember really well because it was also the start of the demise of our friendship in a very tangible way. And that's the Cupcake Gallery, which I actually remember even how the concept came up. I recall that Darius would always say that baking wasn't his thing. And I remember this because when I knew him, he cooked for me all of the time. And one of my requests would be that he makes desserts because I have a huge sweet tooth. And that would be the one request that he would never fulfill because he couldn't bake. And he was very honest about it. However, 8 years or so into knowing him, he decided that he wanted to really start working on his baking skills. So what I didn't know at the time was that while he was at home, he was practicing brushing up on his baking skills to try to get them to an acceptable level. And one day I came to his place. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it was for us to film one of the everyday cooking, or couple do a batch record of a few everyday cooking videos. And he had cupcakes. He had dessert, and I was excited because, again, I have a huge sweet tooth. And so he asked me to try it, and if I'm not mistaken, his best friend was also there. And so we tried the cupcakes, which were red velvet cupcakes with the cream cheese icing. So that was right up my alley. So I was more than happy to try it. And honestly, guys, it was really good, and I was impressed because I knew that he wasn't a baker. So soon he was making more, and he would have people try them if they stopped by his house. I think he was even you know, making sure to give them to people, delivering them, etc., so people could try them. And now that I think about it, and I didn't think about it even as I was doing my research and scripting out and outlining for this video, but cupcakes were extremely popular back then. And we had Sprinkles here in Chicago, and it was another cupcake place, and they were Molly's. I think it was Molly's and Sprinkles. They were like hugely popular, and pretty much like everything else, Darius saw that and pretty much copied. Like that's, I think, was his motivation to get, and I know that he was very aware of those, and we talked about, like, he's the one that introduced me to those places. So I think he saw that trend. He saw that it was like, you know, lines out the door and people loving those cupcakes. And so his idea, now that I'm looking back at it, it's maybe not as happenstance as I kind of thought it was. I think all along he was planning on this journey that he ended up on in actually opening a cupcake shop. So back to what I did know at the time. If I'm not mistaken, I think he was unemployed during this time. So he kind of had the bandwidth to make these cupcakes and pretty much mass produce them from home. And so I do remember that people really liked them, and again, I did too. And so he started to charge for them and pretty much bake them on demand for people as they ordered them. And now I'm realizing, although I wasn't paying attention to it back then, this is when he started to become obsessed with the whole millionaire by 30 idea. And I remember him sharing with me all of these strategies. He had the presentation post-its up, and I mean, he had everything written down and he had mapped it out, etc. So at that time, I do remember seeing a mindset shift in him from basically working corporate jobs or seeking to get another corporate job so that he could, you know, make a living, etc. I saw a shift towards entrepreneurship where that became his focus, and he was no longer looking for or really considering a corporate job. It was like, let me try to make this work so that I don't have to do a corporate gig again. And there's nothing wrong with that, because that's my life. And I remember being in his guest bedroom, which he had turned into his office, while he showed me his brainstorm of ideas, which were plastered around the room on the presentation post-its, which was just a brainstorm of his ideas all written out, which many of them sounded lofty to me. However, I've always been a visionary and entrepreneur myself, so I didn't think of any of it as being impossible. Although honestly, some of the ideas and plans did not seem cohesive or logical based on the circumstances. But now, fast forwarding a decade, it's clear to me that some of them were never supposed to seem logical or cohesive because they were scams from their inception. Nevertheless, the demand for his cupcakes increased, and the next thing you know, Darius was baking cupcakes literally 24/7. And it was honestly fairly easy for him to build a customer base because it primarily started with a lot of people he knew from the church world, whether it was members of his church, those people in his choirs, or the people he met through the community choirs that he was a part of for many years, while basically running around in the church circles. So that gave him a really nice base of a couple hundred people. Additionally, around that time, he was also building his following on YouTube. And so he had some of those people who were more local, who were also very willing to support his cupcake business. He would have people stopping by his apartment to pick up cupcakes all times of day and night, whether it was for them, their co-workers, or events or parties that they were having. And if memory serves me correctly, he also offered delivery service at a premium cost. Like, I want to say it was an extra $20 or so, no matter where they lived. And surprisingly, people were buying them. Even some of my friends and family became customers and supported him with no prompting from me whatsoever. This was also around the time that Darius's following on social media, YouTube, Facebook, etc., had started to become large enough that he was starting to interact more with strangers, so much so that some of his customers who were coming to his home to pick up cupcakes were actually strangers from social media. And I recall that he was really excited about the additional revenue that he was receiving from all of these strangers. But at the same time, he was kind of irritated by having to interact with these strangers. So it was kind of an interesting dichotomy, which is still what I'm hearing today from those who are close to him that give me feedback about the fact that he still acts the same behind the scenes, whereas he presents one way on camera in front of his D wives, and then behind the scenes, he's like can't stand them. And then honestly, the other concern that he had was privacy, and I definitely 100% agree with that, and also the safety perspective of people coming to his home who he didn't know just to pick up cupcakes and not knowing really what their real intentions were. However, because the D-wives equaled his bag, he acts the part as if he loves them. He did it then and he still does it now. Whereas in real life, he just sees them as his pawns of his chess game of becoming a multimillionaire. Nevertheless, when his cupcake sales really started to pick up and it became too much for him to manage in a notebook, he decided to create a website that was dedicated for ordering his cupcakes. And by this time, he had also started to master making other flavors of the cupcakes. Because for the first couple months, he only made red velvet cupcakes because that was the only flavor that he was able to master at the time. But he kept practicing and eventually ended up with, I think, 20 flavors or so. Eventually, Darius started to talk about opening a physical location for his cupcake shop on the west side of Chicago, just a few doors down from his church. And I remember talking to him about it, and I thought it was really a good idea because not only was it a few doors down from his church, but also he had plenty of family and friends, and of course church members, who also were on the west side of Chicago. And at that time, the additional support that he had from strangers was primarily Black church women. So I vaguely remember actually going to the location of the place that he wanted to rent that was a few doors down from his church. And I remember the place needing a lot of work. And he originally asked me to come because at the time I still had a remodeling company, and he wanted me to, of course, look at it so that I could give him pricing on how much it would cost to build it out, to bring it up to standards that were good enough for him to open. Now, remember, at this time, Darius was unemployed, and it wasn't like he had any money saved or anything. So this is also around the time that he started to bring up the idea of having investors so that he could raise the capital that he needed in order to open up the cupcake shop. And basically, without these investors, this dream would not have come true because he had no money to make it happen. So Darius worked on his prospectus for the Cupcake Gallery, and I assisted him with the logistics for the first investors meeting, which was being held not too far from the storefront that he was planning to lease for the Cupcake Gallery. I remember actually going with Darius to look at the space where he was gonna hold the meeting. Once he locked in, I went into planning mode for the event. He ended up, if I'm not mistaken, making some light finger foods for the event. And I remember it was more of an after work sort of meeting. And I recall that the turnout was actually really good. I wanna say there were easily 40 to 60 people there. Everything from some friends, family, and supporters of Darius to colleagues, co-workers of other people attending. It was basically a mixture of people who some knew him well, some didn't know him really at all, and only knew about the potential investment opportunity. And I even invited my best friend. Now, at the time, I wasn't investing, and I purposely didn't invest because I really don't like to mix money and friendship. And I think looking back, my gut was telling me not to invest, but I did share the opportunity with a handful of people who might have money to invest on that level. Because the truth is, I wasn't sure if it was going to work. I think my gut was just telling me don't get involved. And not because I thought it was a scam at all, but just maybe because I don't know, my gut. That's the best way I can describe it. So at the meeting, Darius was charismatic as usual, pulling all the snake oil salesman's tricks out of his hat. And once again, I was very impressed with the public figure version of Darius. Again, because it's more polished and shinier than the everyday version of Darius that those of us who knew and know him personally get. Because at that time, I was used to the regular, goofy, and sometimes juvenile, yet enjoyable to be around Darius. That was who I knew. And there's still a lot of that today that you can see in the IG lives, but it's definitely still different in person or one-on-one. Nevertheless, for Darius, this was a pretty successful start to his first major scam and crime. So because of that, I got my friend caught up as a victim of one of Darius's crimes as well. And truthfully, the reason I was so trustworthy of Darius is because to that point, he had never done anything to make me really mistrust him as far as our friendship went. And he didn't do anything for another, I think, year after that. Out of nowhere, Darius seemed to have switched his business model, primarily church-going women who were traveling from all stretches of the Chicagoland area to come to his apartment to buy cupcakes, to all of a sudden, white women were his base. Because I guess in his mind, he had moved up. So at a certain point, he came out of his haze of worshiping the $300 stroller, and he began to pivot because he realized that his real moneymaker were those same black women that he was so quickly ready to abandon and said had no money, basically. And this was the start of where the narrative of Darius not liking black women kind of came from. And then it evolved from there because there's other situations. Rumors were growing that his social media posts were not actually depicting what was actually happening in real life at his cupcake gallery or in general in some cases. And I really understand the D-wives more than people know, and that's why I think that's why I talk about them so much. It's because I get it, like that no matter what you hear and even see, it's sometimes hard to believe it. And that was exactly what I was doing with Darius. Like, I'm showing up, seeing from my own eyes that this place isn't as jumping as what he's saying and projecting, and I'm seeing it on social media myself, and then I'm showing up and I'm never seeing what he's talking about. But I'm giving benefit of the doubt, like maybe the crowd just left. Like, that was 15 minutes ago. Maybe it emptied out. You know, it was crazy. And so, and I'm not saying there was no customers, but when I hung out there was just sporadic, a person here, there, maybe 2 or 3 at a time max, but it was not a constant flow of customers the way that it was presented. Meanwhile, at a certain point, some of the investors of the Cupcake Gallery ended up banding together, finding each other, and they created a group where they were looking into a class action lawsuit. And I remember this clearly because Darius's now ex-best friend and I, the two that he scammed in the food truck business, we happened to be together that day, riding in the car doing something, and we got a call. One of us got the call from one of the investors, the Cupcake Gallery investors, because however they got our number, I don't even know, but they ended up knowing that we were close to Darius and all of that. And so they were reaching out to us for help in locating him because they were trying to get their money. And at that time, we told them we didn't even know where he was at that point. So we didn't know really how we could help the group. We didn't have anything to help them really with besides some information. And what we later realized was why we didn't know where Darius was because he had ran off to New York by that time. But in summary, the whole Cupcake Gallery investor situation was a scam. And I don't know if he started out as a scam. That I cannot say 100%. But it was definitely a scam because people did not get what they were promised. And at a certain point, he knew what he was doing, for sure. The other piece of it is that what Darius did was completely illegal and is considered a federal crime.
That's fine. What law I broke? Well, tell me what rule, what law did I break?
Poppin' like I'm supposed to. Watch out for the people that ain't close to. Speak a little something you could toast to. I ain't tryna hear about what you want